Welcome, everyone. This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from this group of guys, and we have one thing in common. We have a few things in common, actually, but we love Drupal. We are here again on Wednesday afternoon in a Google Hangout. Please visit us at talkingdrupal.com. Today is episode 82. It is January 21st, and we're going to talk about organic groups. Is it the 21st?
Yes.
Okay, good. John made a face like it wasn't. Welcome, everyone.
No, the face was the reverse order of the introduction. It was confusing me.
Yeah. So the video introduction is not the same as the mechanical audio introduction that people get in the podcast. But welcome to this Wednesday, this ball-deflating Wednesday here in New England. And I say that because anyone who follows American football will know that the New England Patriots, our New England Patriots, are in the Super Bowl against the Seattle Seahawks in 2 weeks, and the only talk out on the world right now is how the Patriots are cheaters because they deflated their balls by 2 pounds per square inch.
It was only 11 out of 12. I mean.
Yeah, so, I just only bring this up because I follow football a little bit, and it's just been totally consuming in the last few days. So, you know what? It sucks to follow a cheater.
So I didn't look at anything about that today. Is that sort of the official word? Is that?
Yeah, the NFL did an investigation. They found that 11 out of the 12 balls were underinflated.
But does that make it harder to catch, or
no, quite the opposite. It makes it easier to throw, and I would imagine easier to catch because it's a little bit softer.
They don't use the same ball on each side.
Well, I don't know.
No, I do know. So what happens is each team is responsible for their own balls, and what happens is each team has 12 balls that they use for the offense. This is including kicking. And before the game, what's supposed to happen is the referees check the balls on each team.
Okay.
To make sure that they're the right weight and the right inflation between 2 points that the NFL has described as being
like 11 and 13 psi or something.
Yeah, whatever those numbers are, right?
Okay.
So they did an investigation after the game to find out that 11 of the Patriots balls were lower than what is defined in the rules. What they haven't said yet is definitively that the referees did check the balls before the game, which I think is important because if they did check them the way they were supposed to before the game, which is like 2 hours before the game, and then they somehow lost the deflation or lost their air during the game, that means that something really went wrong and that there is some blame to go here. But this investigation isn't quite done, but where there's smoke, there's fire, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I look at it as like there's probably a ball boy somewhere that's going to lose their job because they're going to be a scapegoat. I also look at it from the standpoint of wasn't like they won by a touchdown or a field goal or like a small margin. It was a pretty large margin, and I could see this being a bigger issue if it were a smaller margin and they were had some sort of advantage. Ultimately, I don't think the 45-7 victory really had to do with balls being deflated.
Yeah, John, I agree with you. I don't think anyone would argue that it impacted this game, but I think there's a bigger question. And the thing in my mind is if the team that I root for and support is breaking the rules and deliberately cheating, I really have an issue with that.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. Well,
whether it impacted the game or not, and whether all the other teams do it or not, the fact is that here in New England, this is not the first time this has come up. So there was an issue, about 5 years ago?
Yeah, what was that? Now I can't remember what the details were.
So the Patriots were accused of and warned not to be taping the opposing team
Oh yeah.
during practice.
Yeah.
They were warned about it and then still did it, and then were caught, and so that was the issue. I think it was in 2007 or 2008. So there's a bit of a history here, and it's easy to say after the fact that the ball deflation really didn't impact and doesn't have a big deal in the game. And if that's the case, then why are you even doing it?
Yeah.
In my mind, you know what I mean? What if it
Right.
doesn't matter, then why are you doing it?
Well, the thing is,
I
it's
wonder,
cumulative.
like, I wonder, one of the things, it was pretty cold on Sunday.
Well, right.
I think the issue was more. No, it wasn't cold at all. Actually, Sunday it was like 50 degrees at game time, so it wasn't cold.
Oh, okay.
But the issue was it was rainy. So it really was a very mild day for January in New England. I mean,
Right.
Can you remember a 50-degree day?
No,
in
I was
January in the
dumb. I
past?
rode in the morning when it was still freezing out. So
Yeah. So no, it was like 51 degrees at game time. So it was a very unusually warm day.
I'm
But
kind
it was
of
wet.
I'm kind of in question of what you just said. Like, why, if it's not going to give you that much of an advantage, why do it at all? Why risk getting caught? Is this a league-wide thing? And where I come down on it really is like, Patriots are a great football team. They have a great quarterback. I'm not just saying that because I'm a fan. I firmly believe that they have a lot of talent. Where was the breakdown? Was it that the refs didn't verify the weight of the balls and the balls just were they were not inflated correctly? Is it that the ball boy was acting alone and thought that he needed to give them some advantage for some reason? Is this coming down from the leadership? Is Bill Belichick saying like, hey, you're gonna underinflate those balls for us, right? Or is Bob Kraft making phone calls? Like, where is this coming from? And that's really where I think the blame needs to be placed. And also if it is coming down from the top, I agree that looks pretty crappy from as a Patriots fan to have the team kind of taking that approach towards their games.
So this is where I think it breaks down. So I don't think any ball boy would act on his own. That's ridiculous, right?
No.
The ball boy, the quarterback probably defines the way he likes his balls to be. The way he likes his balls. However you want to take that, right? So the quarterback knows the way he likes the feel of the ball. So my guess is, totally speculation, is that this is standard practice and has been like this for a long time. There's a lot of teams that probably know that he likes his balls deflated, and someone waited till the right moment to make this an issue. That's my guess on what's going on here.
Yeah, it does seem like a crazy risk to take in a playoff.
On one game. Yeah, my guess is this has gone on every single game all year long.
Yeah, and it's probably just like you said, he just underinflated them too much without checking, and it happened. And is the question, if it is on purpose, why they're all professional athletes? Incremental advantage really adds up, and at that level of play. I mean, if they were playing against high school or college teams, then it probably wouldn't matter. But when they're playing against the other rival for the AFC Championship, then teeny pieces, teeny little changes that we wouldn't notice have a huge impact.
Well, when you beat a team by 35 points, I don't think anyone would think that made that much of a difference. But you know what? They beat someone by a very little margin the week before, and the question would come up if they were doing it that week as well.
Was that the difference?
Did that make a difference?
Yeah.
Well, we'll see next week, or I'm sorry, in 2 weeks.
Right.
If they lose the Super Bowl and the balls are perfectly inflated, well, then there's your answer.
Clearly, that will be it.
That will be definitive. I also think in the last point, I think that's important to make here, and we can get back on topic and not be a sports podcast, is that Patriots win is the Patriots, I have heard, have been quoted as being like the Yankees of football. And I think once once there's one little thing that they do wrong, or that, maybe every team does that and they're the only ones that quote unquote got caught. I don't know, but I think people tend to harp on it a lot more when it's the Patriots than if it were like the Jets or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or one of these other teams that are not.
I think the Cowboys were the supervillain team for a while.
Yeah, that's just because most of them went to jail.
Well, but I think anytime you have a team that is sort of
so dominant,
for a long time. I mean, it was interesting. I heard that even Super Bowl ticket prices are down with agencies around 18% over last year because of team fatigue. I mean, that's what they're blaming it on. Is the Patriots have gone to the Super Bowl so many times that people outside New England are not willing to pay the same kind of money.
So maybe this is just what you needed to get those ticket sales up? Is that what you're implying?
This is actually a story planted by the ticket agencies to get the ticket prices back up. There you go. There's our wild ass guess prediction for the root of all of this.
And you know what? This is really actually a very great lead into our topic today, organic groups. I have no idea what the connection is. But
well, because if you were going to make a fan community site in Drupal, you would probably want to use this set of modules to do it.
Okay.
There you go. Nicely done, Steve. Nicely done. Reeled it all the way back in.
Okay, so our topic today is organic groups. I did want to start just quickly with some follow-up from last week. So we talked about the module of the week was paragraphs, which I had learned about only a few days before, shared on the show, and Nick used it this week on a project. So Nick, you got some feedback on that module. Why don't you share that with us before we move on to organic groups?
Yeah, so it first of all, it's a fantastic module. It was very easy to set up. It fills a similar role to field collection. I feel like there's a couple of things that kind of distinguish it. Not that it's necessarily better or field collections is worse, but the two things that really stand out to me that are different is, first, it feels more polished, which I guess in most senses the word would make it better. But it feels more polished. There's more options on the field administration page. The second thing, and the reason why it's really useful in this particular case, is when you're assigning a paragraph to a content type, you're able to choose which bundles to use. For example, in the project that I'm using it for, it's a very media-rich website, and occasionally a user uploading a post needs to have an image gallery. Sometimes it needs to be a native image gallery. Sometimes it needs to be a Flickr gallery. Sometimes it might need to be a Facebook gallery. Rather than having a content type that has a list of all three of those options, you can just have one paragraph bundle, and then at the time of creating the post, they can choose which kind of gallery they're going to be adding. So you don't have all that extra UI clutter. And you can set it up, it's just like any other entity, you can make it so that they can add as many as they want. So if they have more than one gallery and it's different kinds, they can choose to interleave them however they want, or you can restrict it to just one. It's extremely simple, extremely powerful. So far, very happy with it.
So what issues have you found? Are there any things that you've seen with the module that you have a little bit of reservation about?
The biggest problem I have with it currently is it's called paragraphs, and when you have, and that doesn't necessarily semantically mean anything in all cases. So for example, in my use case, when you go to add a post, it says add image gallery paragraph or add Flickr paragraph. And there's no real way to change that.
Oh, so the name of the module is embedded in the user interface.
Yeah, and it looks like there's a way to change that, but it doesn't actually change it in every instance. So you can say you can find the name of the paragraph, but it doesn't change it everywhere. So it can probably cause some confusion there. but overall it's pretty nice. And then the only other thing I think I need to look at is views integration. Although since it's just an entity, I know that there'll be a way to grab it. It just might be a bit messy. And then migration is probably going to be a bit messy.
Yeah, collecting it all back together again as a single sort of body field, I think might be a little bit of a challenge if you're trying to export the content.
Yeah. No, it's rather the other way. I'm trying to import content from an existing site.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, either one I can imagine would be tricky.
Yeah, because a paragraph is an entity, so technically the field is only really storing the entity ID.
Right.
Nick, but does this make it any different than any other migration related to entity relationships?
A little bit, just because, for example, if you have an entity reference, you can just create the reference entity first, and then usually you can search by label.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in this case, it's images, so it's FID. It's no different than field collections or certain embedded entities in a content type. It's not specific to this. It's just something specific to that project, and I know it's going to be messy.
Well, I think, in looking at it as, if this is how you're handling something instead of a body field, then every single post gets more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, so either you're importing it into effectively a single paragraph, quote unquote, or you're trying to sort of smartly break it up into multiples. That's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think I don't think it necessarily works where you're replacing the entire body field. I think it really shines in the kind of use case I have for it, where you have multiple modes of adding an image gallery, and at the time of adding the post, the person has the ability to add it. And another place I'm using it in the same project is with audio embeds. Sometimes the audio might be an MP3 file, sometimes it might be a stream from Libsyn, sometimes it might be a stream from somewhere else. So giving them the ability to choose, and you can do it by select list or by button. So you can have a button that says, add Libsyn or add MP3 file. They click it, and then they get the widget that they need without cluttering the UI.
Right.
If you're using it to really allow complex layouts, I think it also works there, but you need a really, really you need a good editorial team for that, or you'll end up with a mess.
Okay, so let's move on to organic groups. Thanks, Nick.
No problem.
What is an organic group? What do we mean by that?
Well, I think, going back historically to its origins, it was, I think it was created as a way to create any kind of ad hoc grouping of people around a topic of content on the site. And, that can be looked at in the way they use it in Open Atrium as like a collection of people in a department. It could be in a way that we used it at Schoolyard as a way for a teacher to have a classroom blog that students and parents are connected to. So it's just it's a combination of content types, content users around membership, and membership having different kinds of roles where you can be the administrator of that group and manage it, add people, remove people, publish content, and it also controls access, or it can control access.
So we're adding a layer of, in default Drupal, from core, you have the ability to control what people can view and what they can create based on roles.
Yep.
So organic groups adds a layer between there that says, I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to assign users to groups, and I'm going to connect content to groups, and I'm going to give permissions based on that.
Right. So whereas if you wanted to allow, let's take the example of teachers. You want to allow teachers to create content that their the people in the kids and the parents connected to their classroom can see.
Mm-hmm.
Without organic groups, you're creating a content type and giving teachers the ability to create that kind of content without any kind of restriction on where it might be placed. And there's no way to automatically put it in a place in the website without building some other mechanism like views or something like that based on who wrote it. I mean, it's fairly...
Unless you get crazy with roles, really.
Right. Well, right. And so that's one of the things that you want to try and avoid is having too many roles, because if you have a lot of modules and a lot of roles, all of a sudden you can't open the permission screen anymore.
Yeah.
It gets really, really crazy.
Right.
Organic groups takes that whole notion and allows you to create a group node. So you create a content type that becomes the group, and each group maintains its own membership, and then you can have kinds of content that are associated with that group. So it could be posts, it could be events, it could be files, it could be all kinds of things, and that once it's group enabled, if somebody has permission to create it and they're the administrator of that group, they can then create content that shows up in that group, and by default it shows up as kind of like a blog sort of format, like this kind of river of news once you go to the main page of that group. And then you can control whether you want it to be open, that if anyone can join it, or if they have to be invited, or if it can be completely private and not show up in any list at all unless you're a member.
So the general feel for organic groups is that you should be looking at it under the conditions of you have multiple users, multiple admins, and multiple users. Like what kind of condition would you say is the point that you abandon the Drupal default with roles and say I need to consider this?
I think if you have more than one. I mean, basically, if you want to have more than one content area that is distinct and has its own managers, people who are maintaining that content, and people who want to gather together online on the site in a way to sort of view and share that grouping of content.
Yeah.
Is there a point in anyone's sorry, Nick, but is there a point in anyone's mind that you would say, hey, I do not want to go to organic groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the differentiator is you need more than one admin to be able to administer subsets of content, and then have other subsets of content that they can't touch that's similar to that content. So for example, if you have an article, I mean, by default Drupal allows you to set permissions where you can create, delete, edit your own, or edit anybody. And you have users that you don't want them to be able to edit anybody else's content, just anybody's content, but only content with a certain feature, and that certain feature might be it's about a hobby. So to go back to the football, since we spoke about that so long, somebody who's a fan of the Patriots, you want them to be able to update statistics about the Patriots and blogs about the Patriots, but you don't want them to be able to touch anything on the Seahawks pages.
Yeah, it's an interesting point and a real differentiating to what you just mentioned is that it's permissions within a particular content type.
Exactly.
Which you cannot do at all, really, out of the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, you would have it, and it's not just the author. So, for example, if Jason and I were both Patriots fans, you could make us both editors for the Patriots.
Group admins.
Yeah, group admins for the Patriots, and then we can do anything with content, blogs and articles that's in the Patriots group. But say, for example, John and Steven are fans of the Jets.
Bite your tongue.
They would be. My father's actually a Jets fan.
Hey, well, at least he didn't call you a Knicks fan.
Yeah.
Bite his tongue.
Yeah. So
I feel bad for your father.
They're able to perform the edit functionality on blogs and articles, but only for stuff that belongs to the Jets group. Whereas with default Drupal, you could, for example, limit us to editing only our own content. So if I were to be the
But
one
then we couldn't both be managing the same group.
exactly, and then Jason and I wouldn't be able to edit each other's content, even though it's in the same group. So organic groups
And
kind of gives you that.
the danger you get into that point is that you start allowing people to share logins.
Right.
Yeah,
well, that's yes.
exactly.
You want to avoid that.
Right. Exactly.
Now, I don't know if this. I think this is a good point to bring. Good time to bring this up, but probably not the best time to discuss in great depth. That one of the real limitations I've found with organic groups is in role delegation. If you're creating a user, you're able to make a user a member of a group when you're creating them, but you're not able to delegate their permissions within that group, which I find is somewhat complex, unless you guys know of a solution.
Well, no. If you're an admin already of that group, when you add a member to that group, you can make that member an admin also.
No, what I mean is on the user creation page, when you're creating the user for the first time, if you're an admin, you can say they have this role in Drupal, this is their username, their email, their password, they're members of this group, but then once you save it, you have to go to that group administration page.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way around that. I've just, we are typically steering our clients towards managing where the issue is. So, they're usually doing a larger import of users at the beginning of the school year. So that's one of the more frequent use cases. And then they're going into individual groups and adding people into the groups and setting permissions there.
Okay.
So it's, from there it's a list, and you can just click on the people you want to make an admin, and that's, right from the list of users. It's really quick and easy.
So let's talk a little bit about use cases. So we've mentioned, I think we give actually a pretty good description of what organic groups could be used for. Do you have any other examples of places you've used them, or it sort of fits nicely to implement organic groups?
Well, the most recent thing that we did was build out a section for the board of trustees of a school.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed private content, private files. They also had a number of committees within that group, and they had a mixture of full board members and some staff who were accessing this area, but not everybody should be able to see everything. So we actually used a combination of things where everybody had to belong to the group, but we also looked at the roles assigned to that user and determined what they could see in any given area based on that combination. So people that were in like a full admin or board role got to see everything anywhere, but if you were in one of this sort of lesser roles but still a member, you could see things in the committee that you were connected to, but not in areas where all you could see were dates of meetings. You couldn't see any attached files. So that was kind of a combination of those approaches, but it was entirely driven by being able to create that private area in the first place so that they could manage all that content there.
I think that there are three main areas that organic groups really thrives. I think one of the first has already been mentioned is education. It really lends itself towards classroom or department or discipline, separating that kind of stuff out. And I know several colleges use it in really unique ways in order to help collaboration between students of particular classes.
So Nick, but when you say education, to me, if I extend that out to what that structure means, is to me that means I have multiple admins with content and multiple viewers of content. It's like bridging those two things together. So anything that sort of follows that model works here, right?
Yeah. So and it's typically, like I said, education's one. Mm-hmm. Another one that's really popular is government. Being able to set up different departments with their own section and give them, some modicum of their own website. And then communities, as we had mentioned a couple of times, the football teams, fans, or
Right.
Baseball, or collecting coins or whatever.
I mean, I think one like that, like government and organizational intranet, like internal facing sites, I think it's the huge opportunity there. So, I mean, we've done work. I mean, John and I had to do some work with a big Fortune 25 company when we worked together on their intranet, and it was based in SharePoint, which is, I mean, you could have a whole other month's worth of shows talking about how terrible an idea that is, but the reasoning for it was so that each department, each area could have their own distributed authorship and maintain their own content and kind of own their own little domain, all the while still having things tied into their centralized authentication and all this other stuff. So they spent millions of dollars, like literally millions of dollars, developing this thing, and organic groups would actually provide that exact same functionality. You could have defined layouts, delegated styles if you wanted to, but you could have all the different kinds of widgets and that sort of thing to make the department sites work really well without having that massive overhead of servers and databases and licensing costs and all that other stuff. It would work a lot faster.
So are there any things that we would recommend not using organic groups for? I mean, that might be a silly question, but if they follow the criteria that we've already set here, is there anything that we would say you shouldn't do this? Or maybe what are the things you should be prepared for if you're going to do this? Because it does add a level of complexity.
It does.
To everything. The minute you install it, the minute you start using it, adds a level of complexity to everything else in the website from that point on.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would say, and I think Nick and Jason probably have more experience with organic groups than I do. But I would say anything where you can't define, this is going to be redundant, but groups. If you can't, you're building a large website and you can't define users into certain groups and those administrators into certain groups or roles, I think organic groups is probably not the best call for you. Also, areas where people may be changing groups frequently, or administrators might be administering more than one group, or changing groups frequently. I think that's another thing to consider. What's your structure, and how are these groups formed and administered?
That's actually a scenario where organic groups makes it a little bit easier.
Right.
In my experience, because we have teachers who are connected with multiple groups all the time, and the nice thing about making the maintenance, the hook that you're getting into maintaining content is based on group administration rather than individual ID. It actually does make it a little bit simpler for someone to come in and out of that role and still be able to maintain all the content in that isolated area. It does, though, I did want to say the major caveat that we ran into was when you need to have other ways of controlling access to maintaining content, you can have conflicts in the weight and the application of those permissions.
Yeah.
So taxonomy access control, node access, these different modules that you could get into for allowing people to administer certain areas of the website, the permission structure for organic groups needs to be layered in the right order. I know the content access module used to allow you to assign a weight to where those permissions were, just like you would assign block weights. So if you want to apply this permission first and then the other one, then you could control where that one is in the process. But otherwise, sometimes it's not so easy to fix.
And then there's also other options too. So, for example, taking university as an example, where sometimes you need certain people to be able to edit large amounts of groups. So, for example, you can have, the engineering department, and you have the dean should be able to edit any class group within their department. You can layer groups. So you can have one group that is the department and has a set of permissions, and then one of that group's type of content is class, and that's also a group. And then you can set permissions so that the person in the parent group can edit anything in their children. So that way, somebody that's an administrator in the office of the dean's office, they can edit anything in their department without having to be added to the subgroup. Whereas professors can still only edit their own students or their own content.
Yeah, there was a module developed by, I don't know if it was UMass or there was some, John, maybe you remember, that was basically a whole way of developing this kind of top-down way of distributing authorship that would allow you to do something like that, but you kind of had to build the site in this fashion from the ground up. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was called, but it was a way for you to essentially allow the menu structure to control and distribute authoring and editing permissions. It was really interesting, and I know that it worked pretty well for a university site, although what we found in our experience in working with Yale was that the likelihood that you'd have a lot of this kind of intermediate editors was very, very slim. It was really more small group of centralized people who could edit everything, and then people maintaining their own section, and then we use Workbench moderation to control the actual publishing of it. But we didn't really need a lot of intermediate levels of...
Yeah, I find that's the case as well. A lot of times clients will say, hey, we need it to be controlled, to the nth degree, and then you find out that there's maybe 2 people that need to be able to edit 2 extra pages, and it's like you're pushing development out 6 months and adding 80% to the price of this project just to have those 2 people, and then they agree to do away with it. You launch the site, and that person never ever logs in. So typically it's very, very rare that you need that level of control, but if it's necessary, it's definitely available.
So the modules, so when you're controlling, this is really an access control module to some degree, right? Which
it is actually for editing and for access in the first place.
Yeah, so it's editing, and then it's viewing the content, access to the content, which implies that it's integrated with the majority of modules that we all typically use, which would be views and things like that.
It is, or there are helper modules to help tie it in.
Right. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, So let's go under the assumption that most of the stuff you want to do in Drupal will support organic groups. Let's just take that assumption for a minute. Are there any places that you found it to fall apart? So we're taking the optimistic approach here that if you use organic groups, you won't get bitten in too many areas, and I'm wondering what are the areas that you have seen in the past that it does not work well with? Are there any?
I've definitely seen 1 or 2.
I can't remember any that I've seen.
Well, not
the biggest risk is the complication, and if you don't understand organic groups well enough, it's very, very, very easy to set yourself in a corner with respect to adding people to groups, and it's very easy to confuse yourself. Are you saying that
the biggest challenge will be yourself, is what you're saying?
Well, it's the planning. I mean, understanding what it does and what it does well. Are there any, Jason? Are there key concepts that people need to understand that we haven't discussed? Well, yes, and I think you have to think about group membership is almost like its own entity. So you've got group.
It's literally its own entity.
Well, yeah, except it's
as well, right?
It's not actually sort of documented as such, or the documentation is somewhat limited. I mean, I've had to really dig for a lot of things. So, so I think like the example would be, you want to, it's fairly easy to have a view that shows you content for the group that you're looking at the time, and that's all well and good. But then if you want to show content that might be collected for you from lots of groups that you belong to, that's a different kind of relationship you need to look at. And then if you want to reach into that content and pull back elements of it, but only show it, because you're creating these views of content that's all dynamically filtered based on the individual. So you tend to have to test as that individual all the time, and sort of have several windows open so you can kind of see like, what should this person see? Am I seeing all the right posts in the right order? Can I do the right things? We had to do a lot of custom building for navigation for the groups, because the UI and the sort of the pre-built bits and pieces weren't really what we wanted. It does tend to be centered around panels, and we don't use panels. So that does add a little bit of complexity.
That actually brings up a really good point. Testing with organic groups becomes much more complex. I mean, you have to test CRUD operations in a group with each role, and then you also have to test it with each Drupal role, and then you have to test it with certain combinations of both, because Drupal roles can override permissions in organic groups occasionally. And it reminds me of another thing as well, because you had mentioned that setting up views in order to pull the current organic group content is fairly easy. I find that to be I don't know if it's just me, but I find that when I'm creating those views, if I build them from the ground up and add the relationship, it doesn't always quite work as expected. But if I take the default organic groups view and clone it and then modify it the way I need to, it tends to work better. And I do understand how relationships work in views very well. I don't know why it is, but I'd say about 30% of the time when I create it, it doesn't work. So I almost always just clone it now. And
a lot of it has to do with finding the right point of origin to create the view. Are you creating a user view and then trying to bridge the content? Are you trying to create a group node view and trying to get group content related to it, filtered by the group context of the logged in user? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that you end up having to look at it, and that's why I think starting with one, because it comes with several example views, and we ended up doing some things where we wanted to set up notifications, and the organic group notifications helper module was really unpredictable, and it did not give you very much control over formatting of the notification messages themselves. So we ended up instead putting a flag on the group node, which is tied to the user who's flagging it, and the flag simply said, I want to get updates or not. And because that flag is now tied into the organic group context of that user and that group node, we can have a rule that fires whenever there's new content. It will go and look through anybody that has flagged that group, and that becomes the list of users that we send notifications to. So that tie-in with rules works really nicely. I know Nick is mentioning something in the comments here about integrate like rules and commerce, but in this case, this has worked really well for us to combine the flag module and rules and HTML formatted email to send out really good notifications whenever new content gets.
Hey, let's go back to just the point you said. Nick mentioned something about rules in commerce.
I'm not sure. I thought that this was tied into organic groups as well, but maybe not. Nick, was
Yes, sorry, I just something that popped up on my feed. Kind of a PSA, I guess. If you're using Commerce in rules, don't upgrade to 2.8. There's a big regression that causes all rules to not fire for Commerce.
Oh, awesome.
Rules hook and knit fires too late, and
so this has nothing to do with organic groups.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
really
I was just
ignore
kind
it.
I was not trying to derail the conversation.
Yeah, thanks,
I was
Nick.
just kind of commenting.
So
Had a Ron Burgundy moment right there. Don't you know he reads whatever's on the prompter, Nick?
yeah, come on. So I think that you can use organic groups pretty happily right out of the box, but we found that it really paid some dividends for us to dig into the API a little bit and create our own set of custom views and navigation. That was actually like when you're in each group, it looks at who you are, and if you have permission to create content in that group, then the navigation on the left builds differently. It will have create content links, but it'll also have a link to the group directory and the group main page, and so we use views to build up event lists, galleries, sidebars, like all kinds of stuff, so that when you're looking at an individual classroom, if you're the teacher, you have all your content creation links right there. If you're a parent, you see your galleries and your events and all that stuff, and it combines, like on the main page, it combines all of your group content together. So we have a blended calendar for all the groups that you belong to. We have a blended set of like this sort of tile approach of all the news updates that are connected to all of the classrooms that you're connected with. And they even have a parent discussion forum that shows in the sidebar that will show recent comments and replies.
I'm curious to know if you guys think that the basic role structure and permissions that organic groups gives you, that you think this should or could be part of core at some point of Drupal in the future. That most websites have gotten to the point that they have these really, and they're not necessarily even complex relationships, but they have these kinds of relationships between authors and content viewers, and that this kind of functionality should be rolled into basically what Drupal provides.
Yeah, I don't know that I can. I don't know that I agree with that. I think, it's adding a lot of extra functionality that may not be necessary on every website, and I think you run into a battle between modules like Workbench, which kind of do something similar in the permission set, but don't have the group functionality. So I think I think dropping this into core would be a bad move in my opinion.
Yeah, I partially agree with John. I mean, I think that while it's valuable, it's really complex, and I use it a fair amount, but I think I still use it on less than 30% of my websites. I disagree with the Workbench comment. I think Workbench and organic groups are very different. Workbench is much more of a workflow thing. Organic groups is much more of an access thing and permissions thing. It's a bit different, but I don't know if it necessarily needs to be in core. I think it's a bit more, and it needs to be more agile than core's development cycle.
I would agree with that, and actually I would, while I think that there are lots of sites that do benefit from something like this, I actually do still think it's very much a minority. I think there are way more sites that are just more straightforward. I mean, we may happen to work on a bunch of sites that would benefit from this, but I still think the lion's share of websites don't need anything more than maybe Workbench moderation in terms of distributing authorship for content, but I think the private content notion and that group functionality, I think, happens a lot less frequently. It would be nice if it was a little bit more well baked and flexible So like, I mean, we had to rewrite a lot of stuff simply because the UI and the way it presented itself wasn't what we wanted. It tends to be a little rigid in the stuff that it gives you. But I'm much more comfortable having it be an external grouping of things that can develop on a faster timescale than core.
I think one of the reasons, though, that the UI isn't as polished as it could be, though, is because the nature of organic groups itself means that you need to customize those pieces anyway, almost always. I mean, I don't find myself building the same thing over and over each time I do an organic group website.
Well, I think having like this sort of like the group menu, and I don't mean like a menu, but I mean like the group management and membership object. Is very rigid. You can't really. It's built differently. So if you look at it, it's not consistent in the markup that's applied or the way things are generated in it. So
that's a fair point.
A little bit more flexibility in some of those things, and a little bit more clarity in the documentation about how all of it works and the layering of it would be really helpful. And hey, that's I should be going and contributing to that, and I haven't. But
and just an explanation of how the membership entity works would be nice too.
Yeah, that's
that's a good point.
There's a ton of API stuff in there that's incredibly useful. In doing things like writing up stuff to automatically subscribe people to groups is hugely useful. And it was really a lot of trial and error and examining the modules that led me to the right functions to do it. So there's a lot more there that's just not surfaced through documentation.
No, that's a good point, actually. I just recently went through that, trying to set up some access control with a helper module I built. No, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So the reason why I brought up this coming into core is that there's lots of modules out there that are trying to address multi-dimensional access configurations. And I do think that Drupal is falling short in providing any of that stuff at core. Mm-hmm. And that is something, to me, when you're talking about access, should be a core level thing. And there's lots of modules trying to give you, trying to expand on what's already there. And,
right.
And I feel that there just needs to be some more work in that area.
I think one...
No, go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think one issue with adding those is there are so many different ways to have access. And as Jason's experienced, if they were all in core and people could just willy-nilly set things up, you'd end up with conflicts all over the place. Like, if there's taxonomy access control, there's content access control, node access control, general Drupal access control, Workbench, and organic groups, and if we had all those options available, most sites I think would take 45 minutes to.
Yeah, I think I really think it comes down to, and then maybe this is part of the reason that access control in Drupal is kind of stripped down and simplified. I agree with Nick. I think every site that I build has. Every site that I build, most of the default access controls that come in Drupal core are just fine. But for those sites that do require different types of access control, every one of them is always different. It's never like, oh, we need a Workbench type access control, or we need taxonomy access control, or we need they vary widely. I think you would add a lot of bloat to Drupal core, offering a lot of these solutions that don't necessarily need to be there and that you may not use on every project.
Yeah.
I think it's a much better solution to say, like, these exist, and if you need them, go out and get them, and they will work.
Can you imagine trying to entangle somebody's website if they had all 5 of those modules enabled?
Well, it's easy, like it would stop working. I mean, we found out the hard way when we added we had content access and organic groups, and because we could adjust the weight of content access, we were able to keep access the way we wanted it. We tried to add taxonomy access in there because we had another circumstance where tagged content, we wanted to be able to allow people to control content that way if it was tagged as being in a certain area of the website. And that was kind of a disaster. It actually ended up undoing a lot of the restrictions that were in place and made a bunch of other content public. So it's it's really hard. And the thing is, a lot of the things that make it hard and make it complicated in using them together are not visible. So it's not accessible for you to see in what order are these permissions restrictions being applied without adjusting it programmatically.
Sure. Jason, what percentage of sites you deal with are using organic groups? Roughly, would you say?
Right now, I'd say maybe a quarter of the sites that we're working with are using it.
5%. Okay. And Nick's already said 30%. How about you, John? Lower than that?
30%. Yeah, I would say. I think out of all of the sites that we're building right now, I think one of them uses organic groups.
Yeah, it's.
So I don't know what a percentage is on that, but I would say less than 10%.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I think what would be really valuable is just coming up with a better way to distribute the editorial permission based on where things are in a given site. We know we can do it based on a content type, but we don't have the ability to do that and say, I want to allow this person to administer this section of the website. So any content of this kind that has this menu path, this branch of this menu, I want to give them the ability to edit all the content there.
I think there's a module for that, actually.
Of course, there's a module for that. There's a module for everything, but
I think I've looked at that module and it, access. This is kind of a topic for another show, I think. But like access and content access is one of those things that OG or organic groups is a great example of like you having a very well defined like membership group structure. But access in general, there's always that caveat of like, oh, we're going to set up access so that this role has access to this menu path and that menu path. But then there's like always that one person that's like, oh, and I need to be able to edit this thing in that menu path. But only this thing, not everything else. So.
Right, and that's the point when you do have to turn around to your client and say you need to actually hire people that you trust. And if this is a real issue, then you need to put Workbench moderation in place so that they can edit things and not publish them.
We touched on this, by the way, back on episode 12. So talking Drupal /012, entitled Content Approval Workflow. We actually touched on a few of these things. So it's funny how we've at the beginning of the show, we were talking about next week's show, and we came up with a few ideas and looked back and said, oh, yeah, we covered that 6 months ago. We covered that 8 months ago. So it's kind of interesting how some of these topics do recirculate over time.
Yeah, and they come in for different reasons. I mean, you can use organic groups as a true group and allow everybody to contribute content to it, or you can use it for access control, or you can use it for a combination of those things, or for allowing people to build up their own portal-like, listing of news, and I think that's the real gem of it, is that you can actually use it in all of those different ways. It's an incredibly versatile module and little ecosystem. It just does take a little time, especially even going from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, it handles things differently. So it took a little bit of getting used to. I mean, basically what we ended up doing was rebuilding the entire Schoolyard platform when we rebuilt this one particular San Francisco school site. So everything that we did when we were working at Schoolyard was in Drupal 6, and this school came from Schoolyard and decided to work with Ellen and I. and hired us last summer to rebuild the whole thing in Drupal 7. So it was kind of an interesting experience, and I think that we got a lot better with organic groups, and a lot, embraced a lot more Zen. We used a lot fewer modules. We used a lot simpler solutions, like the flag module in conjunction with it, that allowed us to really smooth out not only the parents' flow through it, but also the teachers and school administrators. I think have a much simpler time of things.
So to get started with organic groups, I'd recommend someone just, spinning up a blank Drupal site, installing the module, and getting familiar with it. I know that Drupalize Me has a free tutorial on there about organic groups, and go through and get a sense of, go through the tutorial and get familiar with what the basic concepts are before you try to stick it in the middle of some site that you're already working on. So I think that's a great starting point, is to go through some tutorials to get familiar with the concepts.
Yeah, it's really important to just get that basic introduction, because they're not it's just not obvious enough when you install it and just try and play around. But there are a lot of things in there that you can. If you install it in like a sample site, and make a couple of different users, add the masquerade module so you can switch back and forth between them really easily, and then just start seeing what happens, because it is really fascinating and incredibly powerful to be able to create that completely dynamic and customized view of a site based on your group context at the time. And if you want to see a much larger working installation of it, try checking out OpenAtrium, which is designed as an intranet type solution and uses organic groups to control who's in what department and that sort of thing. And that was a little bit complex to get started with, but it does have a lot of pieces in place and a lot of views you could pick apart and start to sort of see how things go together.
All right, let's move on to our module of the week. So today we have Facebook post. So I submitted this one this week. Have you guys ever needed to post things to Facebook directly from a Drupal website?
Let me tell you a quick story, and this module actually only came out very recently, I think, within the last year or so. Right. So back in the day, we'll say like 2 to 3 years ago. Yep. The clients really wanted, like, I want my blog posts to go out on Twitter, and I want them to go out on Facebook. The Twitter module for Drupal actually has the ability for you to post directly to your Twitter account from content types. It was amazing. There was nothing for Facebook. Matter of fact, the Facebook API made it very, very difficult to actually achieve this functionality through Drupal and the Facebook API. So the workaround for this was that you would post to Twitter with the hashtag FB, and then in Facebook there was an add-on that you could look for the FB hashtag and pull that post into Facebook.
So the solution was not a Drupal one whatsoever.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. No Drupal solution was found until some really, really smart individual developed this module and put it out.
So I take it that you've used it.
I have not used it because I didn't know it existed.
Okay.
But now that I do, I am going to use it all the time.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to set this up and try it out.
Okay. Let me tell you. So I've used it. So let me give you a few little tips here. So when you get, it works great. It works as described. So the idea is that you connect it to Facebook. We could talk a little bit about getting Facebook set up, but so you need to set up a Facebook app. You need to create an app on Facebook side. You need to put it in dev mode. You need to set up a bunch of parameters. You get an app key and a secret key and all that kind of stuff. And then you put them on the Drupal side, and then on the Drupal side, you go to a content type and say, hey, this content type will say article. I'd like to enable this module. So there's a few other Facebook modules in Drupal that allow you to connect to Facebook. This one particular allows a particular user of your website to connect their account to their Facebook account. There's other modules that connect the entire website to a single Facebook account. So the entire website is not user-based postings, but they're like website-based postings.
Well, yeah. If it's meant to be connected to, like, your company's Facebook page.
Yeah, a little different, right?
Yeah.
This module is user-based. It's an important distinction.
Right.
So per user, they can connect to their Facebook account.
It's very much like the Twitter post submodule.
Right. Well, what's kind of interesting about Twitter is they have managed to make it more or less work in both ways. But the weird thing is you have to connect a single account to Twitter in order to enable bringing stuff in, and then you can also, if you want, allow posting to a given account. So you can set it up so that basically anyone could add their own Twitter account, authorize it, and start importing their tweets. But then pushing in the other direction, you define which one you say is the global Twitter account, and then when people post, you can enable that if they have permission to post to Twitter when they're adding new content, and have it automatically tweet a link to that new content.
Yeah, so one of my first questions is, how stable is it? Because there used to be tons of Facebook modules, and one of the reasons why a lot of them never get traction is Facebook would change their API so often that it would break. It would break the site at least once a week. So the second thing is, especially recently, there's been a lot of backlash against people connecting their Facebook account that allows posting, because people would get spammed by their friends so much to join Farmville and etc. So having a website with that option, I'm curious to hear how users of that website have responded.
So let's just hang on here a second. Let's finish the functionality of what this module does, and then maybe.
Oh, you see, none of us know what it is, so we're just making stuff up.
Okay, so and then maybe we can talk about some of the objections. So once someone connects their account and you've connected the Facebook using this module, the Facebook post to like an article, when you go to an article content type, there's an option at the in the form for the content type to post to Twitter, and you give the message that wants to go out, that you want to go out with.
He meant Facebook.
Did I say Twitter?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Facebook. So it goes out with Facebook. So it's enabling a particular content type and the user who's connected their account to also now send out a message. And then you could also have a link back to your page on the website or that article type in Facebook that takes you back to the page on your website. So that's what this module does out of the box. There's sort of a little bit of a caveat here. If you do anything with Facebook, you realize that you have a Facebook personal account, and then you have Facebook pages that you manage.
Mm-hmm.
And those are different. Those are different permissions.
Right.
This module out of the box allows you to connect a Facebook page to your account, a single page, by typing in a Facebook page ID, which users probably don't even know what that is. So there's a usability issue here.
Right.
So it doesn't like bring up some, like the usual functionality that you'd see in another app would be, once you connect to your Facebook, it would list the pages and you check off the one that you want to connect to. This one doesn't do that. It gives you a fill-in box where the user needs to type in the page ID, connect it.
And so the good thing, though, then is it sounds like you can indeed have this post to your business's Facebook page, not to your personal timeline.
Exactly the point.
Right.
I think the user interface needs a little bit of work, which I'm currently working on. But it definitely
right.
and people have multiple business pages too. So does it connect to one page or two pages?
Right.
This module out of the box connects to one page. So now let's get on to, so we'll get back to Nick's objections or questions here.
Yeah, I mean, one of my questions is the stability. Like I said, how I know Facebook's API has slowed down a bit and how much it changes, but I know it was a major issue. And then as far as usability, I know there's been a lot of talk, it's more in apps, mobile apps, but even on websites about connecting with Facebook because people are afraid to have some other entity posting to their Facebook account.
So what happens with Facebook is that when you connect your Drupal to this website, you have to ask for certain permissions, and the user has to approve them.
Yeah,
so it's a matter of someone saying, yes, I approve that this website will post on my behalf. They have a choice to do that or not.
Much like the Twitter module, I imagine when you put in the account credentials or the page ID, it takes you off to Facebook and has you authenticate and accept.
Right, because you have to create an application over on. Well, to get to Nick's point, there's sort of two different use cases here, and one is the individual site owner who wants, when they post new stuff, to go up on their page. That they're not going to be concerned that this is going to spam their friends because they're the only ones that have this permission. Where that could sort of spawn a little bit wider concern would be, let's say you're using this with organic groups, and every time I post something in my organic group, I want to announce my post on Facebook. That sort of gets into this this realm of like, am I going to be spamming all of my friends every time I use this website? But I think
this is the website developer and function of the website decision. This is not a Facebook thing at all. I mean, the developer has complete control over how often this goes out and how it goes out.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, there's a note on the module page about needing to reconnect the Facebook account every 60 days, this being a limitation on Facebook. Have you been using it long enough to know if that's still the case?
So that's on my issue list. I don't actually believe, but if you look at that note, it says
it's a Facebook thing.
And it says that it was at the time they put this functionality in there.
Right.
So I only did this a few days ago, but it's one of my concerns to look at is to say, does this really happen? Because the Facebook connections that I've been using have never forced me to reconnect in 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually don't think that's true.
Oh, well, that's
because I looked through the code. The code in this module is used in all the standard API code. It's calling the Facebook API as documented.
Right.
So it's really more of a Facebook API documentation issue.
Right.
So I don't know if that's true or not. But when you do connect with the module does give the user a message that says this connection will expire in 60 days, and it gives you the date and time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not positive it's accurate yet.
Right. So there's, I think the sorts of things that are typical, the reason people use things like Buffer are so they can create posts to go out on social media, schedule them, and also schedule them to go on various platforms. And being able to take some of the pain out of announcing the latest blog post and being able to do that on your company Facebook page, on Twitter, over on LinkedIn perhaps, using the LinkedIn, one of the LinkedIn integration modules. Those capabilities are really important to site owners who don't, they're doing this to try and save time. So the ability for us to finally add this and actually show that stuff, and then hopefully be able to pull it back, although that's kind of a whole other issue to display. But those are the kinds of things that come up in conversation with clients all the time. How can I save time by using this solution? And hopefully that solution will actually deliver some real value and allow them to do some stuff in a more automated manner.
So I'm in the process of exploring two of the other key, I think, Facebook modules that are out there. One is for Drupal, I think it's just called Facebook. Another one is Facebook Rules, maybe. I can't remember what the name of it is. One is a module that is really focused on back-end processing. So you connect your account for the site, and then you have a number of rules they've created that you can interact with Facebook. So maybe in a show down the road, a few months down the road, we could sort of talk about integrating with Facebook in general, and sort of which direction I've gone in, and the plus and minuses of these things. But it's important to
60 days.
Yeah, after 60 days, I'll have the answer. But it's important to know for people out there that this is out there and it works. I mean, I've tested it to the point that it's physically working.
Steve tested, Steve approved.
Steve approved. All right, guys, so let's wrap up this show. So one thing I just want to mention is that last week we talked a little bit about one of the listeners' problems they were having, questions they had about a website they were building. We did that for Dan. Anyone in the future who wants to do that same kind of thing, has a question or a project they'd like us to talk about on the show, they could email us at talkingdrupal@gmail.com, as Dan did, and we were happy to help him solve some of his problems last week. So we could do that in the future.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to bring up before we call it a day?
The only thing I think we should mention is the worldwide Drupal sprint last weekend. Seemed to be pretty wildly successful. A lot of critical issues were moved into needs review. People joined forces and squashed a bunch of bugs.
That's great.
Yeah, it looked like some 19. I think this is anecdotal information, but 19 items that were critical were moved into needs review after the sprint. So, which is a pretty decent percentage considering they were a little bit over 80 before the sprint.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's great news.
Well, as evidenced by the Drupal release date. Launch date coming in almost a year, I think, from where it was last week.
So let's be careful about how you frame that. So there's a website out there.
Right. Yes. DrupalReleaseDate.com. Not any kind of official announcement.
Yep. Which is completely looking at the data based on dates in the bug list, right?
Right.
It's an automated tool. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And it came in from like probably mid 2017 to mid 2016, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So
yeah, that was a big jump.
Yeah, so it's an indication of a needle moving in a big way, certainly.
Yep.
Okay, so Jason, tell us where people can find you online and anything you've got coming up that you want to tell us about.
Sure. You can find me at jpomentel pretty much everywhere on social networks and at hwdesignco.com. Following last week's announcement that I was going to have to postpone the responsive typography workshop that was supposed to be going on this weekend, we have a new workshop that we just announced coming up. It's more of a general introduction to responsive design and typography full-day workshop in Boston on March 21st, and the following week I'm going to be going and talking about responsive typography at the Squares Conference out in Dallas, Texas.
Great. How about you, John?
As always, you can find me on all the social networks at John Picozzi and always on at umthink.com.
Fantastic. Nick?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at nixvan. And coming up next week, 2 weeks from now, in Boston at the Boston Drupal meetup.
Great.
Excellent. So I'm Stephen Cross. I'll be with Nick at that Boston Drupal meetup. It's become a habit of mine over the last 3 months, so I'm enjoying it. Great place to go. So I'll be there. I'll be the following week after that. I'll be at the Providence Drupal meetup.
Yeah, which I want to say.
I was just about to ask, is it a Tuesday or a Wednesday?
Well, I think we've got to decide. We could do either one, and I think we should think about it and make a decision if we want to move it. But I do have to say, like the last couple 3 months have been really great. We've had some new people showing up, some people we haven't seen very often, some great discussions. I think the new format that we've been trying, following more along the lines of the Boston one with short talks by lots of people, has been fantastic. And I think I feel like there's some nice new life coming back into our local Drupal meetup, and I was really happy to see it.
So if you don't have a local Drupal meetup yourself, create one in your area because it's really simple to do. And if you need some help, let us know. We can give you some tips on how to get that started. And you can find me, just to finish up my my information here, you can find me at email me at steven@parallaxinfodeck.com or visit my website. And I think that's it. I'm late for a customer meeting. It's supposed to be at 2:30. I apologize to you. I'm sorry, everyone. They just texted me. Are we ready for the meeting? I'm like, no. I ran late.
Well, have a good week, everyone.
All right, guys. Take care. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.